significant lessons within it. So let me share the screen here. So Nabhag inquired, "My dear brothers, what have you given to me as my share of my father's property?" His elder brothers answered, "We have kept our father as your share." But when Nabhag went to his father and said, "My dear brothers, my dear father, my elder brothers have given you as my share of property." The father replied, "My dear son, do not rely upon their cheating words. I am not your property." So there's no purport for this. So we come to a purport. Nabhag's father said, "All the descendants of Angira are now going to perform a great sacrifice. But although they are very intelligent, on every sixth day, they will be bewildered in performing sacrifice and will make mistake in their daily duties." Nabhag's father continued, "Go to those great souls and describe two Vedic hymns pertaining to Vaishwadev. When the great sages have completed the sacrifice and are going to the heavenly planets, they will give the remnants of the money they have received from the sacrifice. Therefore, go there immediately." Thus, Nabhag acted according to the advice of his father, and the great sages of Angira dynasty gave him all their wealth and then went to the heavenly planets. So, there are several verses which do not have purports. Let's quickly go ahead with it. Text 6, "Therefore, thereafter, while Nabhag was accepting the riches, a black-looking person from the north came to him and said, 'All the wealth from this sacrificial arena belongs to me.' Then Nabhag then said, 'These riches belong to me. The great saintly persons have delivered them to me.' When Nabhag said this, the black-looking person replied, 'Let us go to your father and ask him to settle our disagreement.' In accordance with this, Nabhag inquired from his father. So when he inquired from his father, the father of Nabhag said, "Whatever the great sages sacrificed in the arena of Daksha Yajna, they offer to Lord Shiva as his share. Therefore, everything in the sacrificial arena certainly belongs to Lord Shiva." Nabhagastam pranamyaha tavesh kilavastukam ityaha me pita brahman chirasatvam prasadaye. Thereupon, after offering obeisances to Lord Shiva, Nabhag said, "O worshipable Lord, everything in this arena of sacrifice is yours. This is the assertion of my father. Now, with great respect, I bow my head before you, begging your mercy." Lord Shiva said, "Whatever your father has said is the truth, and you are also speaking the same truth. Therefore, I, who know the Vedic mantras, shall explain transcendental knowledge to you." Lord Shiva said, "Now you may take all the wealth remaining from sacrifice, for I give it to you." After saying this, Lord Shiva, his most adherent to the religious principles, disappeared from that place. So now, if one hears or chants or remembers this narration in the morning and evening and with great attention, he certainly becomes learned, experienced in understanding the Vedic hymns, and expert in self-realization. This is the Falashruti of this particular section. So basically, this whole pastime goes from text 1 to text 12. Now, there's some very interesting things going on in this pastime, which we'll discuss one by one. In general, whenever we face some obstacle, in yesterday's session, I discussed the point of how when we face difficulties, the Bhagavatam's focus is not so much on seeking justice in the world, or this is the wrongdoer and this person should be punished, but rather its focus is more on what I can learn and how I can grow through that lesson that I have that I can or I should learn. So let me illustrate this through a PowerPoint here. So we can see here, we all seek justice. We all don't like things when they seem unfair to us. So if we did something, say justice can mean, it can be in a very legal formal sense, but it can also mean in a simple sense. If we are talking politely with someone and that person talks angrily with us, hey, why are you behaving like this with me? If we offer a helping hand to someone and then we expect that they may offer us a hand later on, but they pull us down later or kick us down. We don't expect that. So justice can be at various levels. Now we can look at various three broad levels. Justice is over time, across relationships, across layers of our personality, and across levels of existence. Now what do I mean by this? Let's look at each of these levels. And what is the context here? The context is something significant, that Nabhag didn't get what could have been his rightful claim, that he was a part of the royal family. He, in fact, he expected at least a portion of the inheritance, but he didn't get any of it. And what was given was not actually of value in financial terms. So what did he do? He could have gone to war with his father, with his brothers, but he didn't do that. Instead, he chose to seek an alternative, and now through that alternative, he got the resources, that the whatever is prepared for the sacrifice to Lord Shiva, that was given to him afterwards. So, but then what happened is that Lord Shiva came apparently to test him, and then he got a higher reward. What was the higher reward? When he passed that test through Lord Shiva, he got spiritual knowledge, which ultimately led to his elevation and liberation. Not only his elevation and liberation, but also the elevation and liberation for whoever hears the story. So what exactly is going on in this story? So, when you talk about justice at various levels, so it can be over time, across relationships. What do we mean by over time? See, when we do something good, we expect some good results. So for example, if we sow seeds, if we expect that some fruit should come from the sowing of the seeds. So now if we sow grains, the results will come after, say, a few months. The harvesting season is typically 3, 4, 5 months after the sowing of the seeds. But on the other hand, if we sow mango seed, we sow mango to get mango tree or mango fruits, that may take nearly a decade at times. Some things may take even more. So the results over time, what do they depend on? They depend on what is being sown. So if we consider our karma to be like seeds that are sown, then we understand that different actions will provide results after different levels of time. So the challenge is that we don't know what seeds we are sowing when. What makes, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 4th chapter, basically the theme from 4:16 to 18 in the Gita is about the complexity of karma. And one of the key verses over there is Gahana Karmano Gatihi. Gahana Karmano Gatihi is the results of karma, the movements of karma. Actually, Krishna uses a very significant word over here. Gati, Gahana means complex. But Gati is a very significant word over there. The Gahana is complex, but Gati is movements. Now, it is, movement means motion. So generally, when we move toward Param Gati, that is Gati can mean movement, Gati can also mean destination. Krishna is said to be the Param Gati. So it can, words are multivalent. Gati can also mean velocity or momentum. That how fast something is moving, at velocity, or the speed and the force with which it is moving, momentum. So all these are various meanings of the word Gati. But when Krishna says Gahana Karmano Gatihi, what he means is that there is a principle of responsiveness within the universe, that the kind of actions that we do, they produce certain results. But which results will come when, that is difficult to know, because we don't know in advance what kind of seeds we are showing. So the mystery of complexity is because if we consider actions, our actions to be like seeds that we sow, if we consider our actions to be seeds that we sow, then the problem is the same action can be a different seed at different times. What do I mean by this? Let's so normally we think, okay, if I sow a mango seed, I'll get mango. Then I know I'm going to get this after 10 years. If I sow some grains, I know this is going to come after 3-4 years. So now there are there are different kinds of actions. Say, for example, if we are hungry and we eat food, and then that's the action that we do, eating, and then that leads to some kind of energy. But the same food that we eat, there are some foods which we are eating, and they, all kinds of food that we may eat, they may give us energy immediately. But some foods may lead to good health over a long period of time. Other foods, they may not lead to any immediate effect, but they may lead to bad health over a period of time. So the activity of eating is the same, but when I am going to eat one day, the effect may be different. But when I eat for 10 days, on the 10th day or on the 100th day, the result might be different. So in one sense, the same activity that is being done, the same activity may be a different seed at a different time. Let's look at that from another perspective. If we consider the complexity of karma with respect to relationships, and I'll come to how all this is related with our topic, which is being discussed over here. We're going to talk about levels of existence and levels of personality. See, relationships, what happens is, some people are by nature very cordial. So what happens is, we speak politely with them and they speak politely with us. So our polite speech attracts their polite speech, and that's wonderful. But some people might be a little gruff, or some people might be more reclusive. So if somebody is more reclusive, they don't like to talk much, so they may not respond much to us. And it's not because they are gruff or rough, it's just that that's not their nature. So for such people, we may speak politely once, twice, thrice, 4 times, and maybe after some people, after 100 times, they may speak politely with us. Otherwise, they're just perfunctory with us at best. So what happens is, our polite speech may, with reclusive people, they might not really open up. There might be a perfunctory response from them. Okay, this is what is to be done, this will be done, that's fine. But for somebody else, somebody who is gruff, our polite speech may lead to their almost rude response. So why might this happen? So the point we're making is, we are speaking, and our speech is one action, one karma. But with some people, that relationship may develop quite easily and naturally. We speak politely, they speak politely. With some people, it may take a little more time. So if somebody is reclusive, so cordial could be one extreme, gruff could be another extreme, reclusive could be in between. So somebody who is a little reclusive, it may take a little more time for them to realize to earn trust, and then to open their hearts. And when they open their hearts, then things become clearer. Then they start understanding, okay, this person is trustworthy, and then we will have a more deeper and better interactions with them. And this is simply in terms of relationships. But then what happens is, different people have different personalities. So if we speak politely with others now, and we speak politely not just with, say, we speak politely with others. So what happens is that polite speech, some people may not polite speech amid provocation. So amid gruff speech or gruff or rude speech by others, what happens by that is, that person may never change. But over time, we will develop the habit of politeness amid provocation. And that may stand us in good stead in difficult situations in future. When we have to deal with difficult people, that training may stand us in good stead. Now we know famously Prabhupada said tolerance is the, or rather one's greatness can be estimated by the capacity to tolerate, is estimated by one's capacity to tolerate provoking situations. So what it means is that somebody might speak nicely, conduct themselves nicely, and the people around them may not appreciate them at all. But what happens is, whatever they are doing, it's not just the immediate reciprocation that is happening. We all have layers of personality. There is the physical level, there's the mental level. If I bring this diagram back over here to what we are discussing. So I talked about in terms of seed is over time. Across relationships means that if we may have to be polite for a long time with some people to develop relationship with them. Across layers of personality means that we might be polite with difficult people and then they may never melt. But that strengthens us, that develops our tolerance, our resilience, and then that helps us to function better. So at an external level, dealing with the difficult person may not improve our relationship, but improve our relationship with them. But we will develop more at an emotional level. We may develop at a spiritual level because we maintain an attitude of humility and service. Across relationships can also mean that overall the universe is reciprocal. That if we do good, we will get good back. But we may not get it from the same person. We may spend a lot of time with someone, and we may be very kind, we may be very helpful and extending for someone, and they may just not reciprocate with us. But what may happen is that somebody else may be very extending and helpful with us, and if our vision is not locked to this particular person, say, hey, with this person I tried, things are not working out, but with this person things are working out. So in general, what happens is when we talk about complexity across relationships, now I talked about these four things: across time, relationships, then personality, and I'll talk about layers of existence. Complexity across, what does it mean? Across time, relationship, personality. That means that sometimes we may not get the results from one person. Krishna says that's why it's very difficult to understand what is the right action, what is the wrong action. Kim karma kim akarmeti kavayopyatra mohitaha. Even wise people are bewildered by it. Why are they bewildered? Because the problem is sometimes we may not get reciprocation from the same person. Reciprocation may come from some other person. So a broad operational principle we can say for functioning is, don't overvalue people who devalue us, and value people who value us. Sometimes what happens is we try to spend a lot of time earning respect from someone who just is never going to respect us. Now, for some people to speak kind words is like the way rain falls in the Sahara Desert. It's once in a lifetime event. So, well, okay, we don't have to seek it from them. It may be across someone else. So here, what this story illustrates is, if you go back to this diagram, there is a physical level of reality, there is a mental level of reality, there is a spiritual level of reality. And he could, Nabhag, he could have said, you are being unfair to me. And his father also was not particularly helpful. Father did not try to provide fairness at that level itself. That means he didn't impose. He didn't say that now I am their father and you have to obey me. He had retired, so he gave an alternative way. So what happens with the eyes of knowledge is that we start perceiving bigger realities. It expands our vision to see various perspectives. By perspectives, I mean what? We discussed the circle over there, that my actions are not going waste across time, across relationships, across layers of personality, and across levels of existence. So this particular action maybe providing some fruits at a different level than what I am seeing it. So generally, if our knowledge is limited, then our vision, our perspective becomes limited. For what happens, a child, all that a child pursues is, I am feeling pain and I went to this doctor and the doctor gave me an injection which is causing me even more pain. So what the child perceives is the doctor helpful? The doctor is not helpful. The doctor hurts me. Why? Because the child feels that this is a child's perspective. That I was in pain and coming to the doctor has made me greater pain. But the doctor cures hurt. That is the mother's perspective. And that's why the mother will insist we have to go to a doctor. We have to take treatment. Even if you don't feel like taking it. So in this case, what has happened is the mother has more knowledge than the child. So similarly for us, what happens is that our levels of knowledge increase. Our perspectives increase because our eyes of knowledge broaden, our vision broadens. And one of the themes that the Bhagavatam talks about is, broadly speaking, is that there are, now I'll take all this as the background to talk about what we're going to discuss today. There are levels of existence. Levels of existence means, broadly speaking, we know there are four levels of existence. There is spiritual world, and then within the material world, or within each particular universe within the material world, we have the celestial level, then we have the earthly level, which you can call a terrestrial level, and then there is the subterranean level. The subterranean level is below the earth. So now what is happening over here is that sometimes some results may come at different levels. So subterranean can also include the hellish levels. So broadly speaking, celestial is the heavenly levels. So now what happens is we see things only at the terrestrial level, and we may see this person is so evil, and this person never got any reactions for their evil activity. They just was happy throughout. Just continue to be happy. That's so unfair. Why should it be like this? No. The levels of these levels of reality, the celestial, the terrestrial, the subterranean, they are all actually porous. Their boundaries are interconnected. Their boundaries are not watertight. In fact, we could say that one of the characteristics of Kali Yuga, what is the Kali Yuga is Kali Yuga is it's the age of ignorance. Now Krishna describes the age of ignorance. What happens is it also has knowledge in the mode of ignorance. And what does knowledge in the mode of ignorance mean? It means to equate one slice of reality with all of reality. So that's a typical characteristic of the mode of ignorance. Krishna talks about this in the Gita 18:22. So yattu kritsnavad ekasmin karye saktama hetukam atatvarthavad alpam cha tattamasamudaharutam. So this is the age of ignorance. And what does it mean, equate one slice of reality with all of reality? So we think that the terrestrial level, the earthly level, now we could call that broadly as the physical level, but that's all that exists. So terrestrial level is all that exists. Now when we say that is the physical reality is all that exists. So in the worldview that we have come up with through science, we think that physical reality is all that is there. The idea of heavenly planets, hellish planets, the idea of a spiritual world, all this is not is considered as pre-scientific fantasy, pre-scientific mythology by some people. But the result of this is what? That we start seeking justice only at this level of reality. So somebody might live a very heinous life, they might do a lot of wrong activities, and they may seem to live lifelong in the same way. But some people may actually live that way, and then they will get elevated. They may live that way, but eventually they suffer in the next life. Next life means at another level of existence. That another level of existence is at the subterranean, at the hellish level. So actions always produce results, but they don't always produce results at the same level. They produce results at different levels of reality. And so the characteristic of Kali Yuga is that the boundaries between various levels of existence, they become less and less porous. Less and less porous. It's like now when there's a pandemic, there's sometimes a shutdown. There's sometimes certain areas are called as containment zones, where nobody's allowed to come in, nobody's allowed to go out except for say, essential things. Maybe there is this part of the city, or this building in this particular city is infected. So just as we have containment zones in a pandemic, so similarly, what do we have over here? In now Kali Yuga, the current age of deterioration. So Kali Yuga is present not of the whole world, whole of material world, material existence, or throughout the universe. Kali Yuga is present on Earth. So what happens is the Earth becomes quarantined from the rest of the universe. So that's why the intercosmic, the levels of connectedness, they become less and less. And that's why, whereas we see so many beings, so if we hear about the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, we often see that we could say non-human celestial beings, celestial or demoniac beings, were seen in the past ages. But in the present age, what happens is, because of the reductionism, that is the characteristic of ignorance. Reductionism, when we are ignorant, that doesn't mean we don't know anything. We know very little, and we think that little is a lot, that little is everything. So we are disconnected from perceiving these all such beings, and that's the meaning of a quarantine. So the earth itself becomes like a containment zone during Kali Yuga, and because of which we can't perceive, oh, there are these higher beings. If you see in the past, the higher beings frequently appear. They give their darshan, they give their blessing. Sometimes they take on human forms, and they interact with earthly beings. But in Kali Yuga, that kind of interaction becomes minimal. It becomes very, very less. But the principle is that we will see how Nabhag's faithfulness. So this is the key. This whole analysis that I'm drawing toward this conclusion of what is it that we learn from this whole pastime. Nabhag's faithfulness was at various levels. He had prolonged brahmachari training. You could say it is broad spiritual training he had. Now, was that a mistake for him? When he came back, he seemed to be empty-handed. He had nothing with him at all. So that was a test. So sometimes what happens is, when we pursue something higher in life, at an immediate level, we seem to be ending up empty-handed. So going back to the earlier example, if somebody sows grains and somebody sows mango seeds, then after 5 months, the person who has sowed grains has a very big harvest. Somebody has sown grains has a big harvest. Somebody who has sown mango trees seems to still, the orchard is still hardly growing. So for him, after his prolonged brahmachari training, he seemed to be empty-handed. He had nothing left with him. And now his father was his property, but the father gave him the source of guidance. So he told him, perform the sacrifice. And by that, now what he got was not just material wealth, but he got the Uchishta. Uchishta is remnants, wealth sanctified through sacrifice. And that is a higher wealth, the higher form of wealth than actually the wealth that comes simply from acquiring wealth by either inheritance. So in general, in our life also, if somebody is born with a silver spoon, somebody just born in a wealthy family, then okay, that's good, you have wealth, but what did you do? What did you earn? What effort did you put in to get it? So he could just have simply got wealth by just being a person, being a son in a family. But that was not the case. He had wealth by some other means. That was the sanctified wealth which comes from the product of sacrifice. That's considered a higher wealth. In fact, if you know, Arjuna is called as Dhananjay because he got that sanctified wealth. It was not just wealth, but sanctified wealth is the product of sacrifice which others had done. Now it's interesting, he got this wealth, but then again he lost the wealth. How did he lose the wealth? Because Lord Shiva came over there. And when Lord Shiva came over there, Lord Shiva is a mysterious being, and he often takes on forms to test people. In the Mahabharata, it is described that when Arjuna was in the forest during exile, he decided, he didn't just wait passively for the exile to end. He decided that this is a good time for me to gain more, to excel in my skills. Now, in terms of skills, he was already a archer par excellence. Now, if you consider archery, how well one can shoot one's arrows is important. If you consider in terms of guns, how well you can shoot is important, but what kind of gun you have also is important. So Arjuna decided that his archery skills were great, but he could shoot a target very well with his arrows, but he decided, I want celestial weapons. So to seek celestial weapons, he started performing austerities. He went to the Himalayas. So when he started performing austerity in the Himalayas, at that time, the various devatas appeared before him. And all those devatas appeared and they gave him various blessings. In fact, when he was performing austerities, that time, he saw suddenly a powerful, dangerous wild boar coming. And when this boar was coming, it was charging straight towards him. So Arjuna was sitting in meditation, and although he was very deeply in meditation, at the same time he was alert. It was a forest. So he immediately opened his eyes, and with reflex action, he picked up his bow and shot an arrow with blinding speed. And what happened was, this wild boar, he shot it, and at the same time, that two arrows felled the bow. That one arrow came from him, and another arrow came from a being who looked like a tribal, but a very well-built tribal being. A tribal hunter, it seemed to be like that. And he said that I shot it, I hunted, this is my prize. This is my prize. So just as here Nabhaga said that this is my wealth, and this being had appeared, and this being the being said it's my wealth. So similarly, the same thing happened. And Arjuna, they started fighting, and Arjuna initially started wrestling. They started wrestling with each other, and the fight went on and on. It was just undefeatable. Then they started picking up weapons and fighting. And as he's fighting and fighting, none of his weapons seemed to counter this being. And then he started using whatever celestial weapons he had. And what happened was, his celestial weapons just disappeared into his body. Now, Normally, say if we shoot a bow, if somebody shoots somebody with a gun, then the bullet doesn't disappear into the body. The bullet may disappear through the body, leaving a gaping hole in between, which can be fatal, and the bullet goes and falls somewhere else. But here, the arrow simply seemed to disappear, and Arjuna was stunned, bewildered, and he had been performing austerities, so he had a Shivalinga nearby, where he had been performing austerities. So as he was fighting, he turned over Shivalinga, and he quickly took some sacrifice, some water, and poured the water on the linga. He took some flowers and he put the flowers on the sacred form. And what happened? Whatever water and flower he poured over there, that water and flower appeared on this celestial being's body. And Arjuna understood that this is Lord Shiva himself who had come to test him. And then he offered his obeisance to Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva blessed him. And he said that I will give you my personal astra, the Pashupat Astra. And that was a very powerful weapon which Arjuna added to his arsenal thereby. So what happened to Arjuna? Something similar happened to Nabhag. So here there was a claim. This is the wealth which I was allotted. The sages gave it to me after they performed the sacrifice. He said, no, but whatever was sacrificed belongs to me. So again, what happened is Nabhag turned to his father. Shiva said, ask your father. He said, his father was a wise person. And we see, while the stories of Nabhag and his father Nabhag is there, now what happens is his father says, yes. His father recognizes this is Lord Shiva. Yeah, this wealth is his. So then what happens is, when he goes through this, Nabhag gets something else. How is Nabhag's faithfulness rewarded? So first is no material wealth, but then there is sanctified material wealth. Sanctified material wealth is what he gets through the sacrifice. But then he gets finally the most valuable wealth, the wealth of wisdom, of transcendental knowledge. That's what he gets. And that is the wealth that leads him to not just success in life, but a successful life. Now, we all can notch various successes in life, because successes in life could be, we have a particular goal. I want a house of this size. I want to be in this position I want this kind of job. I want this kind of these things. These are all successes in our life. But just a series of successes in life don't necessarily make a successful life. A successful life is, yes, it can be a series of successes, but ultimately successful life is how much wisdom we get, how much devotion we get, and where we get at the end of our life. So his life becomes successful because he becomes enriched with wisdom. So for him, the results manifest across time, but across levels of existence. So throughout, Nabhag's faithfulness is seen in the sense that he faithfully stays at his guru's ashram, then he faithfully obeys his father's instruction to participate in sacrifice, wait for the sacrifice to get over. Then he submits to his father. He says, okay, this is Lord Shiva, the wealth belongs to him, he submits to it. So when he is faithful in this way, eventually he attains perfection. So in some ways, one of the major themes of the Bhagavatam is to expand our vision. So quite often, I'll conclude with this point now. None of us want life to be, we all feel that our life is unfair. We may all feel, for example, that we may all feel underappreciated. We may feel that, I work so hard, I do so many things, but nobody notices my services, or nobody does nobody notes and values what I'm doing. In general, almost everyone feels underappreciated. Sometimes we may feel unrecognized. But the point is, if we recognize that, if we broaden our perspective with the eyes of knowledge that come from scripture, if we broaden our perspective, then what will happen? We will see that whatever actions we do, so if we live according to scripture, if we live wisely, then our life will ultimately be rewarding. It will not turn out, the reward may not come immediately. It may not be immediately rewarding, but it will be ultimately rewarding. And we see this most dramatically in the example of Srila Prabhupada's life itself. No, it is a lifetime in preparation where for decades, for almost 4 decades, he did not get any results in his outreach. 4 decades, you could say no results, and in the last decade, phenomenal results. So we don't know which action will produce what results and when. So if you understand with scriptural knowledge that there are multiple levels of existence and there are multiple ways in which results will come about, we can actually pursue patiently, faithfully, without losing heart when things don't seem to be going our way. So I'll summarize. I spoke today on this broad theme of recognizing causality and consequentiality, how causes and consequences are connected at various levels. So the Nabhag story is about how he is treated unfairly by his brothers, but he perseveres in being faithful. So I talked about how the principle of karma, of how we all feel that life is not fair at times. To see the ultimate fairness of life, we need to expand our perspective. So sometimes our actions may produce results over time. So grains will grow immediately, but mango seeds will take time to grow. Now, what makes things difficult is that when we are doing an action, we don't always know which seed we are sowing. So the same action may comprise a different seed at different times. So with a person who is naturally cordial, just a sweet smile and a nice smile and sweet words may lead to bonding. But somebody is more reclusive or somebody is gruff, it may require a lot more of the same things to make some kind of connection. So things can be, so our actions and the rewards for them may come across time, may come across relationships. That means we do good to others, but the same people may not respond, but somebody else responds over time. So that is, for that we should learn to don't overvalue those who devalue us. We learn to value those who value us. Sometimes it may just lead to improvement at various layers of our personality. So that particular relationship may never work out, but just by dealing with difficult people and learning to be polite with them, we may learn, and then that may help us in future when we have difficult services to do, difficult people to deal with. So it may just make us tougher, and ultimately at various levels of existence. So some actions, the results may not come at the earthly level. They may come, some people who are evildoers, their reactions may come at a subterranean level, at the hellish level. For some people, it may be at a heavenly level. For some, it may be at a spiritual level. So in Kali Yuga, it is the age of ignorance. So one way the ignorance is there is through knowledge in the mode of ignorance. So the boundaries between various levels of the universe have become less and less porous, and our vision is reduced to the physical level of reality. But the higher beings do exist, and the higher levels of reality are also there. And when we persevere faithfully, eventually results will come. So Nabhag's faithfulness to his spiritual master in his Gurukul seemed to leave him empty-handed when he came back. But it wasn't like that. He got something through his father, rather than just saying, father is useless, what can I do with my father? He took wisdom from him, and by that he got sacrificial results. But when that was challenged, he again turned to his father, took his guidance, and then he realized that this is Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva enriched him with spiritual knowledge. So just as Lord Shiva tested Arjuna, Lord Shiva tested Nabhag also, and when he became successful, then he may not have had successes in his life, but he had ultimately a successful life. So worldly results can bring successes in our life, but it is the wealth of wisdom, of spiritual knowledge, that brings an ultimately successful life. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. Dandavat pranams. Thank you so much for such a wonderful class today and yesterday. I have 2 questions that come to mind, and I hope I can process it and express it properly. My first one, I find the story very interesting, and you gave a lot of wonderful takeaways. But I was curious if there was perhaps a concept that this represents. And what I'm indicating is, as for example, we go through the Gita, we have the different paths. And sometimes you hear that karma yoga is to just act dharmically. And of course, I'm trying to, if you can give an example of, say, a practical example of nishkama karma yoga, but when just through normal just googling reading, I'm not sure about how great the sources are. This examples come up that seem very similar to the story, and the perfection of karma yoga is, for example, to act dharmically and to be detached from results. So from the sounds of it, perhaps Naga, whether or not he got a similar share as his brothers, or whether or not he got this amount of wealth or the other amount of wealth, maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but he acted dharmically. He turned to his father, he said this, and then when there was question about the wealth that he was given, the sanctified wealth, then he turned to his father again, then he went to yeshiva. So it was he didn't act adharmically. And so I was curious if this is another example of karma yoga or nishkama karma yoga, and also in the context of swabhava, swadharma. There's a lot of yajnas also giving back, and I apologize, it's a little jumbled, but could you clarify a little bit? And I hope my question makes sense.
Okay. So could the evolution of Nabhag be connected with the various spiritual paths? At least in the Bhagavatam, there is not much explicit description of that. From whatever Acharya's commentaries I have read, I don't recollect. There may be many Acharya's commentaries that I haven't read, or I may not be recollecting. Yatha Shruti Yatha Mati, as it is said, that what we have understood, what we remember, we speak. Overall, it doesn't seem to be explicitly an evolution across spiritual paths, because the sages are worshipping Lord Shiva, and there is no specific understanding that, okay, Lord Shiva is revealed to be not Lord Vishnu, and then he's moving toward the worship of Lord Vishnu. No, there is no such evolution in that sense. And the sacrifices were a broad part of the culture at those times. The sacrifices could be rituals, they could be done in a karma kande mood, or they could be deeply spiritual if done with proper understanding. So it is described by Vishwanath Chandra Thakur. He mentions this in the case of Prithu Maharaj in the 4th canto, but also can apply to others. He says that when Prithu Maharaj as a king was performing sacrifices, his purpose was not just to, although externally the sacrifices seem to be like for the various devatas, but internally he was seeing the devatas as Narayan Angaja, as parts of Narayan, and accordingly he was contributing to them. So what happened was, he was not just performing, it was external karma kand, but internal it was bhakti. So what we understand by this is that there could be things which are done externally similar, but internally at a higher level of consciousness than what is apparent. So it could be something like that, but because there is no explicit mention of evolution of paths, so I would say that this pastime broadly indicates the principle of submission to a higher authority, or the principle of willingness to learn without being resentful. It could be higher authority or to life itself. We become a student of life and we learn from life without being resentful. So rather than simply resenting, oh, life is treating me so unfairly, he is not resentful, but he's resourceful. Whatever resources are available, he takes it and rises upwards. So that could be a more relatable inference that we can draw from this pastime. There are other pastimes which can be more easily correlated with evolution across various spiritual paths. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a story of a person who can dig at various parts in a treasure in a area, and he gets different kinds of results while digging at various parts. So the correlation across various paths, maybe some other stories might better illustrate that.
Thank
Does
you
that answer
so
your
much.
question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I had a second question.
Yeah.
Going slightly, I'm going to say, different way. I'm not so well versed, say, in the Christian theology. And I know you're a deep scholar. You have read across so much, and you also perhaps can bring some correlation. And I know perhaps we have to be careful about doing direct comparisons or saying, well, say it's all just semantics. The essence is the same. But you had mentioned that of course, in other yugas, and we hear in the reading the Bhagavatam, even the Mahabharata, that the demigods were very active with the humans at a point in time. But perhaps during now Kali Yuga, it's such a degraded age, like the pandemic, the demigods don't want to come. But if I were to try to make a comparison and call it semantics, say in the Christian theology, they have angels. And we also agree with believe in spirits, but I would have thought, say, angels are like demigods. And you do hear that there are angels, for example, that are among this earth. People can see them. And so I was curious, and then I'm not sure if this story is correct, but I believe in Islam, who also part of the Abrahamic lineage, that say the angel Gabriel took human form to talk to Virgin Mary and perhaps even the Prophet Muhammad. And we also see these demigods taking different forms. So I'm not sure if there's one aspect that they do come and we just can't see them. So perhaps we don't, in Kali Yuga, we're so degraded and we don't have that spiritual vision to see them. Or they must take human form in order to be seen. But would you say that, is your understanding that we call demigods are actually angels in the Christian theology, and actually perhaps there is a possibility that they do come and there are people who have that divine vision to actually see them and then can interact with them? I'll leave it like that. Is that
okay, I got your question. I think this is a complicated question, and I will answer this at 3 different levels. The first level is that as you rightly started by saying that when we want to compare, say, angels in the Christian theology with, say, devatas in our theology, we have to be very careful, because there are different worldviews, and in many ways our worldview shapes our view. So there is an objective reality, but where the objective and the objective ends and subjective begins, it's very, very difficult to decide that. So what do I mean by this? That if you consider the Ayurvedic model of the body and say the allopathic model of the body, the Ayurvedic model of the body, there is Jataragni, there is a digestive fire, and there are 3 doshas, there's Kapha, Vata, Pitta. Now, if you consider the allopathic model of the body, that's extremely different. There is no such thing as, the metabolism happens, but there's no such idea that the fire in the body, literally, which determines health. And the Kapha, Vata, Pitta is not exactly what the allopathic model talks about. Now, both models work in their own ways, and we use the model that is most helpful for us. Sometimes we may take allopathic medicine, sometimes we may take Ayurvedic medicines. Now, so similarly, now we can say there is some objective reality. There is the heart, there is the liver, there are the lungs, and whether you're allopathic or Ayurvedic, they both are there. But beyond that, there is a lot which is model dependent. So in the philosophy of science, or in the philosophy language, we say facts don't exist simply as facts. Facts are, to some extent, not only shaped by the theories, but they are also determined by the theories. So the worldview of the Christian theology and the worldview of the Vedic theology, they are very different worldviews. So that's why, for example, we may both may use the word heaven, but heaven in the Vedic theology is a place of pleasure but it is also a temporary place. Whereas heaven, in the Christian theology, as it is broadly understood, it is the ultimate destination. And now to problematize this, Prabhupada also sometimes use the word heaven to refer to not just the heavenly planet. Sometimes he used it to refer to the spiritual world. The temple in Juhu, there Prabhupada wanted a project called Heaven on Earth. Now, heaven on earth, Prabhupada did not envision that as like a luxurious place of comforts as heaven, but he was talking about heaven. He referred in the normal conventional sense that is used, talk about a spiritual world. So that's also a complicated thing. So I talk about two distinct things here. First is that uh, based on the worldview, our world, the what we view is shaped, and in what we view, what is objective and what is subjective, where the objective ends and where the subjective begins, that's quite difficult to discern. So that's why trying to do any direct correlation. So does the Jataragni of the Ayurvedic model of the self refer to the metabolism, or how well the metabolic whatever metabolic index might be there in allopathy? Is it the same? Well, okay, yes or no. So is prana in the yogic model of the self the same as oxygen? Well, okay, not exactly. So I would say that the worldview is shaped by the theology, and that's why we have to firstly be very careful when we try to correlate things. Having given that caveat, the broad principle that is there, that there is the earthly level, and there is the supreme divinity. So there's the earthly level here, or earthly being, we earthly beings are there, and there's divinity, and in between there are various levels of beings. So now those levels of beings, who they specifically are and how they function. See, the Vedic universe is broad enough to accommodate a wide levels of beings. When I wrote my book on reincarnation, one of the evidences, empirical evidences that can be used for reincarnation is near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences that people have. So in general, you will find many well-written books by thoughtful, educated people of, say, somebody, a neurosurgeon who had a who had a severe brain stroke, a stroke, and he was unconscious for over a week. And that time he says, I went in the heavens and saw in the heavens. I met with Jesus. I met with my relatives. So when I studied this, one of the standard criticisms that is used for debunking or refuting, rejecting these kind of near-death experiences is, and they say that people see those beings that they are culturally taught to believe in. So Hindus will not see Jesus. Hindus will see Yamraj, or Hindus will see some devatas. Buddhists may see some Buddhist lamas or some other Buddhist teachers, and Christians see Jesus. And generally, very few people talk about seeing any particular angels, because in modern Christianity, Jesus is much more prominent than the various other beings. So they say that this is just simply a culturally determined hallucination coming from the brain. Well, maybe not. So that's why in my book, I didn't focus on what people saw at some other level of reality. I focused on what people saw at this level of reality. That when their brainwave was completely flat, they heard the conversation between the surgeon and the assistant surgeon. They give empirical details of the room where the surgery was happening. So things like that. But even if we talk about the differences, that Christians saw Jesus and Hindus may see some Devata or Yamaraj, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is only culturally determined. If we take the Vedic principle, see, there is a prominent researcher on near-death experiences who tried to Christianize all near-death experiences, and he tried to prove that only the near-death experiences of Christians are valid, and all near-death experiences of others are invalid. And he tried to prove it by saying that only Christians had good near-death experiences, and all non-Christians had very bad experiences because they got a glimpse of the hell they are going to go to. And he, because he tried to make it overtly religious, and he was one of the pioneering researchers, the whole field of near-death research got tainted by that. And although there is a lot of good evidence about strong near-death experiences which can't be empirically explained, but still near-death experiences are treated sometimes they are painted in the same brush like voodoo, black magic, and crystal healing, or tarot cards, and so many things like that. But my point is, within the Christian theology, there is no room for Yamaraj. So, but within the Vedic theology, we understand that Sambhavami Yuge Yuge, that the Lord appears in different forms. And Prabhupada writes in his purport that the Lord can send his messenger and his servants also. Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually says this for the first time in his Gita commentary in our tradition. That's the first statement. So our understanding would be that the same one divine being has provided many different channels for people to rise upward. And if somebody has been following Christianity and then they have an experience which is meant to make them grow spiritually, then they may see Jesus. If somebody is following Buddhism, they may see Jesus, Buddha, or some other Buddhist saint. So is the Vedic description of the multiple layers of the universe exhaustive, in the sense that, say, we see when the various beings from the universe, so Narasimhadev appears, and then the Kim Purushas and these and the Chanaras and the Kinnaras, they all offer prayers to Narasimhadev. Now there is no description of, say, what we might call as angels or fairies in this particular celestial assembly. But the Bhagavatam itself says that this universe itself is impossible. It's so vast that it's impossible for us to know fully. And what to speak of what exists beyond the universe. So within the Vedic universe, there could be place for beings like fairies and others. It doesn't have to necessarily be a detailed description of all beings. The Vedic universe doesn't have to accommodate all. It can't describe all the beings, because the universe itself is infinitely complex. We say that there are 8.4 million species, but the Padma Purana doesn't go about listing the 8.4 million species. So the principle that between the supreme divinity and human beings, there are intermediate beings who can help in different ways in one's evolution toward divinity. That principle is entirely compatible with the Vedic teachings, and based on that we can understand that there can be various beings. So yes, angels, and I wouldn't say the angels or the fairies or other such beings are exactly like the Devtas. I would say that they are intermediate beings, and the intermediate beings, if we want to use the label or nomenclature of Devtas for all intermediate beings like that, then definitely we could say that the angels are like Devtas. But if you don't want to use that particular terminology, then we can just say that they are intermediate beings between humans and God. And that is what also the role of the Devtas. So now specific details may vary, but you could draw a broad cross-cultural correlation between the angels and the Devtas in the Vedic tradition, as the broad correlation is that both are intermediate beings that help in various ways for the soul's consciousness to evolve. Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. I thought that was such an incredible answer. And the last part that you mentioned really resonated with me. Just as a quick reflection, the way that I had traditionally or recently approached it is, if we believe that these paths are all bona fide and they're all speaking truth, then what they say must be truth. So how do we reconcile it? And talking to other practitioners of different faiths who might have dabbled in bhakti, truly they see that this Vedic literature is the purport to their literature, because there really isn't much commentary. So they've really seen a lot of, or kind of really understand the concepts much more through all the stories and the concepts explained in the Vedic literature. That said, I think what you mentioned in the last point was very clear to me, that again, we cannot think that even our entire Vedic literature is exhaustive. I mean, the wisdom and knowledge of Krishna is so vast. And there are things that, there are questions that aren't answered. For example, how could two souls exist in one or merge? For example, not Rishabdev, but the Lord and also being a jiva, how could they exist in one body, and even the Panchatattva, that isn't explained. Or I heard in different, say, heavenly planets, the Mahabharata is actually 1,000,000 verses versus 100,000 for ours. Our minds can't comprehend that. So when you mention that there are perhaps, say, these angels and guiders that exist that might not be depicted in our literature, doesn't necessarily mean they don't exist. It's just, it's not included, and our literature isn't exhausted. It is not comprehensive. And then it's interesting, and if you have time to comment, though, at the time of death, those, or even those in meditation seeing different beings, my understanding and what I take from your example is that, for example, a Ram Bhakta is going to see Ram at the end of life. Doesn't mean, if they were to affect their lives, doesn't mean Krishna doesn't exist, doesn't mean Narasimha doesn't exist. But Krishna reciprocates with the practitioner based on, I guess, the form or the relationship that they have developed. And similarly, why, say, Prabhupada, my understanding is that that's not his root in the spiritual world, yet he'll come to his disciples and his devotees in this form of Prabhupada to reciprocate with them. It would be quite odd for a disciple to meditate and see, I don't know, some, they would be a cow herboid or a parent in the spiritual world, as they wouldn't understand perhaps that relationship. So from what I gather, and it makes sense to me, is that those of different paths, because they followed this, they all exist, and that's how God, or yes, reciprocates with them through these forms, and they doesn't negate or think that it's all just a hallucination. It's how they've reciprocated. That's the forms they have worshipped. So thank you. Please let me know if I've misstated anything, but that's how I've processed it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What you said. If you look at Srimad Bhagavatam 3:9-11, there's a verse which says that yadyad dhiya tu urugaya vibhavayanti tattad vapuh praniyase sad anugrahaya. That whatever form a devotee desires to worship the Lord in, that form the Lord manifests in. So that can apply specifically to the particular form of Vishnu, particular form of the form of Vishnu Tattva that a person worships, but that can also apply to intermediate beings, because Krishna in 7:21 says that whichever form one desires to worship, I bless that person. Kamaistaistarita jnana prapadyanti anya devata. That's 7:20. In 7:21 he says that yadyad vapu tanu, vapu or tanu, Krishna uses the word, that whichever form you desire to worship, I manifest in that form, and I make your faith, I make your faith stronger in that form. So 7:21 in the Gita also reinforces this theme, and Krishna specifically uses the word form over there, that whichever form you desire to worship, I strengthen your faith in that. So yes, there is accommodation for, it doesn't mean that everything that everyone does in the name of spirituality is right, but it also doesn't, it does mean that just because what somebody is doing in the name of spirituality is different from what we are doing, doesn't make it wrong. We'll have to look at various factors in terms of their spiritual growth, their spiritual understanding, not just look at specifics, but we look at overall factors to understand. So thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Athena, for your thoughtful questions, and my thanks to all of you. Thanks to the Bhakti Center management for this opportunity to serve. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanande.
Jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.